Now going to throw, but before I do that, let's just look at the position that I'm sitting in. I try and make sure that the wheel head is about 2 inches lower than where my thighs are so that I can put some downward pressure. If the seat is too low, the pressure will be into the middle and not sufficiently downwards. If the wheel is too high, you've got too much downward pressure and not enough inward pressure. What we have to do is get this ball of clay centered on the wheel. And we start by, as close as possible, throwing it in place. If you're really accurate, you can get it quite close to center initially. If you're not so accurate, you may need to just push it around a little bit until it's there. Let's turn the wheel on and see how close we are. Not very at this point. So I'm now going to dampen this and put pressure to it. I'm very analytical about the process of throwing, and since in the Western Hemisphere wheels go in an anti-clockwise direction, I usually do most of the initial work on the left-hand side of the clay, because the main thrust of that clay is going around towards the left. And if I hold my hand in place on the left, the clay will center itself against my hand very quickly. If I were to do that on the right, most of that pressure is going away from me, so it will take longer for the clay to center itself against my right hand than against my left. So let's just look at that again. I'll just give it a whack and knock it off center. I try and lodge my elbow into my hip here, and a lot of body weight, just lay on it, center it up, pushing towards the middle. And let's look at this. There's an axis that goes through this arm. If you imagine a straight line going right the way through the dead center of the clay. If the hand is around here, you may hurt your wrist here and you're not getting enough pressure. If your hand is around here, you'll definitely hurt your wrist and still not get enough pressure. So that line right the way through the dead center of the clay is what we're after, pushing towards the middle. I'm going to do something with this particular piece to show you another grip that I think I mentioned before but didn't really show you. And that is something that we call the claw grip. It's a grip that I learned from a German potter once. It's very, very useful grip. A lot of the time when people are pulling things up, they sort of, it gets to be somewhat messy. And, let's make it really messy. And they tend to use a pin tool. The pin tool is very useful. You can just take this and put your finger through there and cut off the piece that's not behaving properly. You can also do it without using a pin tool by the use of the claw grip. Let's just make that bad again at that point. If I just support with my left hand on the outside and I use the clay running up between the fingers on my right hand here, press down and squeeze in, I can get rid of that aberration at the top of that pot and get it back on center quite easily without having to cut a piece off and waste that piece of clay that you spent time wedging up and you really need it to make the thing the right sort of size. Trimming the best speed for the wheel is about halfway between the fast throwing speed and the slow throwing speed. Not really slow and not really fast, but just in the middle there. If the clay comes off in a nice, clean, even, flowing amount, keeps stuck together, that's perfectly fine. If it's too soft, then it'll clog the tools, and you'll soon know about that. So what I try and do here is create a bridge between the right hand and the left hand. The left hand is on top of the pot here and held in place, and it's against my body so it won't move. And then the right one can be held very still for easy cutting without being pulled around. There are times when, they're bound to work separately, but the more that you can get your hands to work together, the better, as it is with the throwing process itself. So I remember the inside shape of the bowl, and I try and trim the outside shape to match the inside one. There's not much pressure. It's like cutting cheddar cheese. If you know what it feels like to cut cheddar cheese with a knife is basically, or with a grater, it's basically the same sort of consistency that we're working with here. It's called either leather hard or cheese hard for very good reason. And just a little pressure. Usually when you start, you're very tentative about this because you don't want to knock it off center. But when you've been doing it for a while, you learn the pressures fairly quickly of what seems to be the ideal pressure for doing something. When the piece is trimmed, just a little tap on the side will break that vacuum that's held it in place, can easily be lifted up. And I usually dry them upside down so that the soft foot that we've just trimmed is not deformed in the process of putting it down on maybe a dirty board or a dirty surface.